I would like to welcome everyone to what has turned out by some reports to be many people's now favorite TV show. One specializing exclusively and entirely in gossip, criticism, and whiny personal anecdotes. That's right, directly from our studios live here in Truth or Double Hernia, New Mexico. This is everyone's life. Or as it's known in the southern hemisphere, it's your fault. Somebody asked me to do that. I didn't know it was going to get that kind of reaction, or I wouldn't have done it. Back to where we were. Where we had left, it seemed to simultaneously meet at the same juncture where the tape ran out last time. Was that it? We were mentioning how it would be like a neuro-revolutionist, and only whoever that might be, who would give more attention, who would give more thought to the everyday job of being human. And he would be doing so not for the sake of the job, but for his own sake, which I will admit again, to save you the trouble, makes almost, dare I say it, no sense. Because a person, whatever might be meant, or whatever you might make out of the apparently metaphorical use of referring to the job of being alive as being human, and that be your job, then to try and be in some way more human, to think more, rather than just saying be more human, which is open to, if an ordinary person was listening, would be open to too great an area of interpretation, because then they'd want to say, well, to be a good human, you've got to be a, and then they would plug in their point of view. You know, a Methodist, a Catholic, a Jew, a Democrat, an American. Just be human. But I was specifying the job, since that is what humanity is about, as being continually, even out there collectively, which is of no interest to us, unless indeed you do live in New Mexico. But that collectively, it is that humans can increasingly think more. What would appear to be aspects closer to the primary world, the change there is quite gradual and of no great consequence. According to statistics, each generation, at least in the avant-garde part, or the highest evolutionary time zone part of this planet, that each generation physically is getting taller and in better health, and we're living longer, and et cetera, et cetera. But the real change in humanity is here. That is where the nervous system has the opportunity to move. Anything else that happens is of no great consequence, primarily speaking. That is, we are not on the verge of developing a third eye, a third arm, and other things I don't care to go into in mixed company. Physically, things are, unless you are in terrible shape, which I hesitate to take another cheap shot and say you probably are, or you wouldn't be sitting at home watching television. But that's not necessarily true. Physically, there's not much more can be done right now if you are just an average sane human. Collectively, it is humanity is growing at that part of the nervous system that's still open-ended, and individually is the only part that's of any consequence, which is what we probably are insinuating by the term an idea of a neuro-revolutionist. Because you can certainly have a hobby of gaining weight, losing weight, building muscles, learning how to run faster, taking up rugby. Not on a chessboard, surely. You can do all that, which is a hobby, but it is not going to constitute any particular change in the individual. It is here that anything extraordinary, only here, that anything extraordinary might be possible. Oftentimes on your grandparents, they thought it was somewhere down in the heart, and that somebody undergo some kind of great change, and mystics believe it, and somewhere it's some kind of aroma, what do they call it, aura? At any rate, something strange would happen, and your little heart would blossom out like an overripe bag of squashes. Do I take it some of you people recall the woman halfway up the aisle on the bus? You remember that? Well. It would only be a neurorevolutionist, someone that's beyond, not to brag about it, since we're not talking about us. It's all a dramatic theatrical presentation. That any change would have to be not for the sake of the job of being human. It can't be that. You don't have to decide, well, it can't be that. It simply cannot be that. They are mutually exclusive. Because if it's for the sake of the job, you're still working at the collective level. You're still operating from a point of view. It would have to be for the sake of one's own self, whatever the bloody hell that might mean. Well, why don't we try it? Okay, this would be an opportunity to make a CF again, which I wish you wouldn't write me. That is not the same thing as an MF. For those of you who got upset earlier, check your Latin. Go back and check your English handbooks back from high school to compare how the ordinary collective thought might differ from the individual version. And as always, in any area where the mind operates, which is everywhere, you've got any number of examples. Religion is always an easy one, but family, community standards, politically, but let's hit religiously again. It's always easy to use that as a comparison of how collective thought differs from any possible individual version. And in this particular way, and I include, so that you don't lose, that you can include being a respectable citizen, a good family member, a good Democrat. But once you're dealing with collective thought, those who are just ordinarily employed by life, just trying to live out a good, ordinary human life, if they do attempt to think more, to give more attention to something, which they would say they do, it is always on the basis that they want to think more and even help, be of assistance, join in, some external agency, entity, institution. It's always that. And I will assume that all of you are sober and upright enough that you no longer would take any of that as being criticism. That is simply the way it is. Anything other than that, in fact, would be insanity if you ask a good, decent, intelligent, forthright Catholic, Jew, Buddhist, Muslim, to stay with religion a minute, and if you said, well, why do you do this? Now, they might want to mumble eventually about, well, I feel like it's better for me, but you'd have to say, no, what's the basis of it? The basis of it always, apparently, is directed toward an external agency or an institution or an entity that they are, if they were very religious, they are attempting to please the gods. That is why I think more. That is why I study my Bible. That is why I study the Quran. That is why I go through these rituals. That is why I debate religious ideas with other. It is all on the basis that they would say, if they were to take my words, that's why I'm using a comparison again, is for you to do it yourself, you understand. That your own nervous system already has this. We're not talking about you going out and trying to debate with somebody. But their idea, if the ordinary intelligence, which you've got it, if it said, well, now I do think more. You dragging all these cheap shots saying only a neurorevolutionist tries to think more than he has to. Now I think more. I don't have to. My particular church, my sect only requires, they say that we only should be there on Thursday or Saturday or Tuesday morning, whenever it is. But we have extracurricular studies of the holy text. And I go there. I don't have to, but I go there and I think about it. I meditate on the will of God. I meditate on what is it that Allah probably wants me to do, being the extraordinary person I obviously am. And so they would say, I do think more. I give my attention to matters I don't have to. I do not waste my time trying to gain physical possessions. I spend more of my time, I spend more of my money at my house of worship. I devote my attention there. I try to think about it. But note, not that there's anything wrong with it. Note, it is still on the basis that they are thinking about slash, or and are, and, or and. They are thinking about, and plus, and this is not sarcastic, you know, they are attempting to help. That is, I want to help my church. Now, don't fall into a cynic's view. It's not that an ordinary person will say, yes, God couldn't get along without me. But that is part of the basis of religion, is that the gods, some super forces, some better forces, want our assistance. Or it's a test to see if we'll help God out, or if we're going to get down here and try to look after our own ass and buy our own car, or whether we're going to try to help out. And it's not an attack on it, because it is historically an admirable view. That even if you are not of a particular religion, if you are an ordinary sane person and someone else displays every possible evidence of being of some conflicting faith, some different faith, still an ordinary sane, sophisticated person will offer a certain amount of admiration, a certain degree of honor, that, well, at least they're trying to do what they think is right. But what they think is right is always on the basis that right is somewhere else. That they are attempting to think about, to give more attention to help some external, and I'm giving you a full range, agency, institution, entity. Whereas, from one view, as strange and as magnificent as that is, but whereas, withal, on the other hand, a revolutionist is attempting to do something quite more extraordinary and astounding. He's attempting to think about and help himself. He is attempting to think about, not in some selfish, egotistical way, as you should know, but he is attempting to, let's put it back another way, he is attempting to look after what would be his own best secondary interest, which cannot be described, it cannot be proven, because it would all end up as a point of view of saying, well, I'm trying to look after my own interest. And then the ordinary mind, if it took this and said, yes, I try to do that. I read the Fountainhead 3 times, and by God, I know what you're talking about. I'm going to selfishly look after my own best interest, and I don't take any crap off Philistines and people who graduate from that architectural school. Okay. And so they could say, I, in fact, try to look after my own best interest. Now, I'm going through this for a second, not to prove anything, because, as you know, this can't be proven. Anytime you think it can, you should think back to that letter that was read tonight from a man who wrote Kyroots and said that he has enjoyed this, but if Kyroots ever attempts to explain what this is all about, he'll quit watching. If you ever hear any of this as being an explanation, you should quit watching. That is not necessarily me. You should quit watching you. This is not an explanation, and this proves naught. Zero. El vacuoso. Sure, it's good that Latin's still not an alive language, or I guess some of us would be arrested. And probably justifiably so. An ordinary person could say, and it's not that new, I'm just using Fountainhead, some of you reacted, but the idea that I should, or any sane, any intelligent person should look after their own best self-interest, and to hell with those who would snap at your ankles and heels, those of lesser talent, lesser intellectual wherewithal. Never mind them. Follow your own star, and etc. And as you know, I assume you do, it's even branched into a would-be political party in our part of the world. But at any rate, there are many people that would now take that, especially if I was, slipped up and said, all right, I know what the Fountainhead, I know what the book is. And people go, aha, okay then, that's what you're talking about. Except the ordinary mind. Now forget we're talking about other people. It's the basis of the operations of the electrochemical nervous system in man. They would say, well, I try to look after my own interest. And if I say, well, I don't think you do. I don't think it's possible. They would go, all right, give me a fair hearing. And I'd say, what else have I got to do besides make hand gestures? And they'd say, all right. And then they would begin to what? They would have to offer how their so-called looking after their own best interest is either in concert with or in conflict with outside views. Which, well, that's all you can do. That's all you can do. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if you can't do that, you're not even up to the average IQ level out there. May I suggest, as insane as it is, but it's too late for us to worry about that now, right? That anything that can be expressed as a manifestation of you looking after your own best self-interest in the secondary sense. We're not talking about the primary, remember, because if you got to talk about looking after yourself in the primary sense, you're hog fodder already. You got no business listening to this. You're like a person that's going to go pay somebody to help you eat less. I still like that one, though. I guess I'm going to keep on that because many of you think back in your salad days, back when your nervous system was a little greener than it is now. Some of you used to take me pulling out examples of religion and comparing that, oh yeah, boy, and you wanted to laugh at religion, especially those that are still suffering from the tire damage spikes that you think your culture had put in your particular closet where you can't back up and think, well, I'd like to sleep with anybody I want to. And I keep seeing, one of the head penguins or a nun or a rabbi or somebody, my mother going, oh, no, you don't. Taking cheap shots at religion are the oldest shots in the world. I mean, as soon as they erected the first church, somebody went by and spat at it. I was trying to bring you more up to date. Just think about somebody, and we're not talking about real physiological difficulties, but people who will go out to all these great places of Sister Jenny Craig or Father Richard Simmons, that they go and pay somebody else money to help them not eat so much. But some of you, at least I was easier, I didn't point out those who go out and pay somebody that I've decided that smoking or drinking is killing me and I'd like to stop. If I give you some money, will you try to help me do this? That's what I mean by if you're not primarily sane, all of this is, I started to say it's even less than a hobby, but I guess it could be even more than a hobby because you would never take it what? Seriously. Which is, with an ordinary person, of course, is just the same thing as taking it extremely seriously. At any rate, do you understand? We're talking about the secondary world. There is no such thing as, in a sense, improving yourself in the primary world. Regardless of the hobbies of losing weight, building muscles, getting in better cardiovascular shape and all that, that's fine. But it's not a matter that you are improving your primary self. If your primary self, we can't help this, folks. If your primary self is not up to some kind of minimal operational speed, I assume you're not looking at this television program if you're sitting it there waiting for me to, tell you to put your hand up on the screen. And I'm going to cure the shape of your nose, Because even I know about physician heal thyself if I could help you do some of that stuff. You got to be in a dream world. That is, you got to be back in the city, which is fine, but you're operating then at the expense of consuming the primary world, which you can't do both. But at any rate, whatever shape you're in, whatever your genes have done to you, hey, don't blame me, all right? Well, plus, don't look at me to say, hey, help me. They got places that do that. If you are going to look after your own best interest, where we got way off the track, you have got to throw it in to take a profitable view. You are trying to look after your own best secondary interest. That's the only thing you can do. Because if you are still wrestling with genes, since it got such an overwhelming display of silence, it was the Kyroots that pointed out. We started out tonight about those who believe that, wait a minute, men invented their own gods. Which the subject's not changed for those of you keeping notes. Not only those who say that men invented their own gods, but then they want to go, You know, like, what an astounding major intellectual breakthrough on my part to have figured that out. Kyroots simply pointed out that those who, and they continue to do it, by the way, they have been doing it now. I can show you, I've got a calendar somewhere. For at least 5,000 years, they have been doing that. It's a nice hobby, because all hobbies, like anything in the secondary world, remember, must continually reinvent itself. But Kyroots also point out that those who believe that they have discovered on their own and are personally astounded and enlightened by the fact that, wait a minute, men simply invent their gods. That is, if you go to Iceland, all their gods are dressed in overcoats. That kind of thing. That every culture's gods miraculously seem to bear a striking resemblance to the local people. All right? So anybody that thinks they've discovered that and are thereby educated, Kyroots simply pointed out that those people should be considered prime suspects in the murder of their great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. I thought if I repeated it with that kind of annotation, it would certainly help, and as always, I was wrong. All right, always remember this. You back up at your own risk, because severe tire damage may result thereof. It is only in the secondary world that one would have the possibility, even the possibility, of looking after one's own best interest, as they might differ from the collective interest. Not that the collective interests are wrong. Remember, the collective interests are correct wherever you are. You better pray that that car starts. You should pray, figuratively speaking, for the health of the collective, whatever they're thinking. If you believe that the collective, the conventional wisdom of your time and place, if you think that they are cockamamie, do I have to go further? Take the worst thing you ever imagined about somebody's intellectual condition and run it up to about the power of somewhere between 7 and 10, and then go look in the mirror. But you should, figuratively, in a sense, be praying for the health of the collective wisdom. Not that you have to, but the point is, whatever the collective wisdom is, whatever the collective thought of your day and time is, that is the proper vehicle. That's the bus upon which everyone's riding. Now, you may be able to do something funny. You may be able to go lock yourself in the bathroom or climb up into the luggage rack somewhere. But you're not going to get to be able to do anything unless that bus starts, unless it runs along, which it's going to do. I'm not making some kind of threat that we all got to think good thoughts and keep the bus going. Contrary. I'm just saying do not waste your time. Boy, this sure is a noisy bus. That's the kind of thinking and insight that really get a man somewhere. Wait a minute, this bus is full of people that I don't like. This bus is full of people, some of them stink. Some of them got half pints of gin, and some of them got nothing to drink. Well, whatever it is, everyone on the bus has got some kind of complaint against everybody else on the bus. That's what a bus is for. Whatever the collective wisdom, whatever the thoughts, wherever the bus itself or those closest around you, wherever they seem to have their attention directed, I shouldn't go any further. It's not that you should be in favor of it. When I say pray for it, their continued good health. It's just not necessary. It's a figure of speech, of course. The point is what they're doing. If you're going to get involved, that you think, wait a minute, I know better than that. Or if you go, well, now finally they're on the right track. If you are either in conflict with or in concert with the collective thought, you're not doing anything. That's not the point. So it's not that it's right or wrong. It's just that that is the health of the collective. That is the health of us all secondarily. There is nothing to argue about. There is nothing to wrestle with. There is nothing to support. Whatever a man's possible secondary individual interest would be something other than that. Not necessarily the opposite. I can't tell you what it is. If I tell you what it is, then you've got your choice. You can go, I don't believe that. Or you can go, aha, I knew that. Hell, you can do that to yourself. Yeah, but if I do it to myself, I don't get to pay somebody. Yeah, you're right. Some of you have been watching too many of those TV preachers, especially some of you that don't even have a television. They've done got lodged in your hormones, which is exactly where they wanted to be. At least a couple of them, I'm sure. We consider, amidst all of the many different and intriguing possibilities of the secondary world, at least you can safely see this, I think. It would only be somebody extraordinary, a neurorevolutionist, to keep a name on it for the time being. It would only be a neurorevolutionist who wants to think about them all. God forbid, forget, much less we should say anything about, like, doing anything about it and like that. You just forget that. But just back to the secondary world of all of the possibilities. I admit I weakened and threw in the modifiers of many and intriguing. But those of you who are good, you know to strike those out. But the many and intriguing, all right, fascinating if you want it that way. Possibilities of the secondary world, who wants to think about them all? No one. And one more time, I'll bet some of you are getting good enough to know that there are people, if an ordinary intellect heard this, which we've got some in everybody, we'd go, that's not true. I read about so-and-so, or I met a man one time, or sometimes I feel like the world should be like my open intellectual oyster. If I had time, I would do nothing but read and pursue the intellectual life. Or I read about so-and-so. Regardless, I was going to say somebody like a Voltaire, but after that cheap shot. I didn't mean that. I'm sure Kyroots didn't mean it was a cheap shot. But you could pick out somebody in history and say, well, the man tried to intellectually embrace many, many things. You know, the Erasmuses and the Da Vinci's. They do not the people, that's not important. But the ordinary human nervous system is not constructed in such a way, it's not even worth there discussing it. But that doesn't matter, I'll discuss it, okay. It's not wired up, it's not possible that they want to think, really not the people, the nervous system, that it wants to think about all of the possibilities. That's insane for one thing, which is not the point. The real point is it's impossible. And yet the nervous system say, contraire, it is possible. I can think of anything that you say. Okay, that's true. But can they think about it? Can you in some way think about it in the sense we've been talking about? That you can think about it and you're not either in conflict with or in concert with? That you are not thinking about it from some point of view? About the best that the human intellect has ever done, I guess, in the English language, is to conjure up the word indifferent. I doubt that most educated, ordinary intellects, if they were to hear this or try to respond at all, would want to use the word indifferent, but that would be their best shot at being able to think about the many different, fascinating, intriguing possibilities of the secondary world, not the primary, because you've got people that barely think who will consider the possibilities of the primary world. No offense to those who have such hobbies, but it does not take an extraordinary brain to take up skydiving. And a man over here says, you can say that again. Perhaps the fellow's afraid of heights. But your level of intelligence, sir, I do not blame you. Wouldn't take much to scare that man. Think about it. If he stood on his biggest... Well, Why pick on a complete stranger and imaginary person sitting right there? We're not talking about exploring the possibilities of the primary world. But when you're talking about exploring the possibilities of the secondary world, it's impossible for the ordinary intellect to do it. It's not impossible for it to say it can. It's not impossible for it to react in an adverse way to hearing such as this and say, well, that's not true. There are many people in the world who have an almost cold-blooded, they were hoping I wouldn't say sang-froid, clinical, objective view, or they can take it. No, they can't. Well, hell yeah, they can. It's real easy. It doesn't prove anything. So, if you know how to do it, you could get St. Francis of Assisi, if he was still here, to want to kick you in the umlaut. Because the ordinary intellect is the basis, well, it's the basis of polarized energy as always in a three-dimensional world. You can take a man that they all identify. I hate to leave on what sounds like some kind of sales promotion for Captain Irony, because you know it's not, but you take the ordinary intellect and it can say, well, I am broad-minded, right? I do push at it. I do have a large heart. I have an open mind. And all you got to do is say, no, you don't. And it's not irony, it's not cynicism, it's sanity, it's health. And the mind will say, well, I do. And you say, well, you're full of it. I got a dog that's more open-minded than you. The intellect cannot see. It cannot see. It takes an extraordinary, it takes an unimportant, we got a minute or so left on tape. It absolutely, the only way at least I won't end on specious irony, or for those of you who prefer it, because I know many of you write and say you do, you prefer spurious irony because it gives you a way out. That's why the word spurious has twice the currency value of specious. Ah, hell, 10 times. In fact, if you teach somebody the meaning of the word specious, and they go, nah, I just stick with spurious, which is a lesson unto itself. For those of you who either want to think about it, go look it up, or perhaps go to Panama City for the weekend. It is not possible in any kind of broad sense of the word for the ordinary intellect to want to think about all of the possibilities in the secondary world. Forget whether it can be done, and forget whether you've got enough years to think of every possibility. Don't try and squeeze out like that. It's you're continually confronted by every possibility going on. That you hear about something that you adamantly, something you're just wired up to react adversely against. We're not talking about, remember, no physical problem, not somebody attacking you. You hear an idea. You hear it third-handed. You hear it coming over television, radio. And you hear it. And you go, Jesus Christ. Am I to spend the rest of my life surrounded by absolute dunderheads? That is a refusal. It's the inability. No matter what they call it, well, I'm defending the proper point of view, or I'm being intelligent. It is the inability. There's no need. It's not something they can learn. There's just no need to think about all of the possibilities of the secondary world. There's simply none. It would drive ordinary people crazy if you could play with justice and try and trick them into doing it or make them do it. It takes somebody non-standard. It takes a would-be revolutionist in some neural way, in a secondary way, to want to. Want to. You don't need to, but to want to think of all of the secondary possibilities. Good night from New Mexico. Good night from our studio.